She's not the kind of woman you marry. Hajun's mother said it in Korean, leaning slightly toward her son like it was a secret. Her voice was low, measured, the kind of low that has practice behind it. It wasn't a secret. Laura heard every word. She had been hearing every word for the last 40 minutes. The comparisons, the cold questions about her background, the careful way they assessed the circumference of her ambition and found it insufficient. And she had heard the mention of another woman named Ji-eun, whose family owned property in Mapogu, and whose name kept surfacing in conversation the way a name does when it has already been decided upon. She had heard Ha-jun's mother describe her to his father in the same tone one might use to describe an interesting but ultimately impractical piece of furniture. Laura set her glass down very carefully. Ha-jun, seated beside her, in close enough that their shoulders almost touched, laughed a little. The way he always laughed when he didn't know what else to do. A soft exhale through the nose, a small retreat. And then his mother said something else. Something he had told her. Something Laura had only ever said out loud once, alone in his apartment in Seoul at 2 a.m, when the city was quiet and she had felt, just briefly, safe enough to be honest. His mother repeated it back now, like evidence. Then that was the moment everything changed. Not because of what the mother said, because of what Ha-jun's silence told her about who he really was. If this story is already pulling something out of you, you're not alone. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a story that goes here. Laura had come to Korea the way you come to anything that changes you, without choosing it. She grew up in a narrow house in Brixton. The woman who lived below them was Korean, Mrs. Yoon. 73 years old, shaped like a question mark, and she had decided very early on that Laura was her business. She fed her doenjang jjigae on cold Tuesdays, siki in small ceramic cups on the days Laura came downstairs with the face of a child who had been told to manage her own feelings, and she talked, in Korean mostly, with the radio playing something old and sad in the background, and Laura absorbed it the way children absorb everything they are not yet old enough to refuse. She stopped going downstairs when she was 12. She put the language in a box. She did not touch it again for nearly 15 years. Ha-jun found her at a conference in London. He wore a navy suit and had the kind of confidence that comes from a lifetime of being listened to. After the panel, he found her at the drinks table and said, "You were the only person in that room who asked a question that actually cost me something." She should have noted then that a man who leads with how you made him feel is a man who has learned that this works. She didn't. She took the drink. She gave him her number. And over the 7 months that followed, she let herself believe that being chosen by someone like him meant something about her own value, which is the oldest and most expensive mistake a person can make. He warned her about his family once, on the flight to Seoul. "They're traditional," he said, looking out the window. Just don't take it personally if they're quiet." "Have you told them about me?" she asked. "Actually, I told them." He looked back at the window. "I've told them about you." Which was not an answer. She knew that. She let it go anyway, because she had already bought the ticket, and because she had spent enough of her life navigating rooms that weren't built for her to believe she could manage one more. That was her mistake. Not loving him. Believing that managing was the same as belonging. That his parents' home was in Seongbuk-dong, in the northern hills of Seoul, where the streets narrowed and the houses sat back behind walls. It was the kind of neighborhood that expressed wealth through understatement. No flashy gates, no aggressive display, just the quiet solidity of things, built to last. Ha-jun's family had lived there for 2 generations. The house knew it. She stood at the entrance and took off her shoes, placing them beside the neat row already assembled there. His father's, his mother's, a smaller pair she did not ask about. Inside, the smell of doenjang and sesame hit her like a memory she didn't know she had. Somewhere in her body, something responded before her mind could catch up. The walls held family photographs, His parents on what appeared to be their wedding day, both of them formal and slightly distant in the way of people who take vows seriously. The Ha-joon at various ages. Serious child, serious teenager, serious young man, a through line of composed restraint. And one photograph she wasn't expecting. Ha-joon with a woman, both of them younger, standing somewhere coastal with the comfortable proximity of people who know each other's weight. She did not ask. His mother emerged from the kitchen. Her smile was practiced and arrived in the eyes approximately 1 second after the mouth, which was the only tell. She was elegant in the way that Korean women of a certain generation and class are elegant, quietly, completely, as if effortlessness required enormous discipline, which it did. She greeted Laura in English that was precise and slightly formal, and said how lovely it was to have her. His father shook her hand, said nothing beyond a greeting. He had the kind of face that processes information from a distance and reveals conclusions to no one. The grandmother was seated already at the table. She was small and compacted by age, dressed in pale gray, and she looked at Laura the way Mrs. Yoon used to look at her, with an assessment that had nothing to do with judgment and everything to do with attention. Laura felt it land on her and stayed there. She looked back. She almost smiled. She didn't. Dinner began in English. This was the performance portion. His mother asked what Laura did. She answered. His mother asked where she was from. And here was the pause. On the familiar small pause, as Laura said London and watched the follow-up question form. But originally, she answered that too. Nigeria, through her father's side. Her mother was British Ghanaian. She had given this answer many times in many rooms and had learned to deliver it with a complete face. His father asked what her father did. She told him. Retired nurse, 30 years in the National Health Service. There was the briefest recalibration behind his eyes. Then his mother asked if she cooked Korean food. A little, Laura said. It was the truth. She had learned 3 dishes from watching Mrs. Yoon. She did not explain this. Then, without ceremony or transition, as if a switch had been flipped, the family shifted into Korean. She kept her face exactly where it was, pleasant, attentive, slightly lost. Ha-joon glanced at her, a small apologetic flicker. He did not reach for her hand. His mother said in Korean, "She's pretty, very put together." A pause, then, "But not elegant. There's a difference." Laura reached for her water glass. His father made a sound of acknowledgement that was not agreement and was not disagreement. His mother continued. Foreign girls are usually very independent. They don't always understand what family means, in the full sense. Ha-joon said, in Korean, "She's not like that." His mother looked at him. "You've said that about women before." Silence at the table. Laura lifted a piece of kimchi to her mouth and chewed it thoughtfully and looked at the painting on the far wall, which depicted a mountain she didn't recognize. She had not known, until this moment, how strange it was to hear your own life being discussed by people who believed you could not hear them. There was something almost clinical about it, like being a specimen, like watching through glass. The mother mentioned Ji-eun, said the name lightly. The way you say a name when you want the other person to feel its weight without you appearing to apply pressure. Ji-eun's family had a good name in this neighborhood. Ji-eun had studied in Seoul and stayed in Seoul. Ji-eun understood what was expected. Hajun did not say anything for a moment. Then he said Ji-eun was a good person. His mother smiled. She asks about you. Laura was looking at the painting on the wall. In her peripheral vision, she could see Hajun's hands on the table. But still. She knew those hands. She knew the specific way tension organized itself in them when he was buying time. His father spoke for the first time at length. He said that marriage was a decision about family, not just about 2 people. That what a woman brought to a family was not only about love, It was about alignment, values, the ability to understand what you were entering and to respect it fully. He said this, looking at his soup. Ha-joon said quietly, "AMBW." Just the word. Just the name. His father did not look up. Laura kept her breathing even. She had learned this years ago. The discipline of the face, the management of the chest. She was very good at it. She had been practicing since she was 7 years old in a classroom where she was the only one who looked like her since she was 12 and folding herself smaller since she was 22 and walking into rooms that hadn't been built with her in mind. She was exceptional at this. It had cost her things she was still discovering. His mother's voice shifted. Lower now. More intimate. She leaned toward Hajun in the way that mothers do when they want to speak as a mother rather than as a host. She asked him in Korean, "Are you serious about her? Truly?" The table was very quiet. Outside, a car passed on the hill road. Somewhere in the kitchen, something was still simmering. Hajun said, "For now." 2 syllables. That was all. Yeah, the quietest demolition she had ever witnessed. His mother nodded, not surprised, not disappointed, confirmed. Then worse. He said in Korean the words that took what Laura had offered him in his apartment at 2 in the morning and placed it on this table for his family to handle. She worries she's not enough, that she doesn't fit. I've told her she does, but... He paused, made a small gesture with his hand. It's an ongoing thing. His mother said, "Ah." His father said nothing. And Ha-joon, the man who had told her she didn't need him to be something he wasn't, laughed. It was small, barely audible, the kind of laugh that escapes before you can stop it because you are, fundamentally, more comfortable in the room you are in than in the one you were building with someone else. Inside Laura's chest, something that had been close to breaking simply went quiet. She did not cry. She had used that option 6 months ago in a different room over a smaller hurt, and she had no interest in spending it again on something this size. She put her fork down very slowly, the way you put things down when you want your hands to have something careful to do. She touched her napkin. She looked at the table. The flashbacks came not as images, but as sentences. The conference. You asked a question that actually cost me something. His apartment at 7 months in. The city quiet. Her voice at its most honest. I'm terrified I'm going to fit into your life, just enough for you to keep me and not enough for you to choose me. His face then, so certain. He had held her face in his hands. You already fit. You've always fit. She had believed him. She had believed him because she wanted to, yes, but also because he had never before said a thing he didn't mean. That was the trap, and he had established himself as honest in all the small things, so that when he was dishonest in the one thing that mattered, she had no framework for it. The grandmother was looking at her. Laura had felt this throughout the meal, the old woman's attention, steady and unblinking, different from the others. Where the parents saw category and found Laura wanting, the grandmother seemed to be engaged in a different project entirely. She looked at Laura the way Mrs. Yoon had looked at her. Across 30 years and an ocean, like someone trying to take an accurate account of what was actually in front of them. Their eyes met for just a moment. The grandmother's expression did not change. But she set her chopsticks down and folded her hands in her lap in a way that felt to Laura like a small acknowledgement, like a door opening an inch. His mother was speaking again. Her voice had returned to its hostess register. Practical now, even kind in the detached way of people who believe they are doing you a favor. She said to Ha-joon, still in Korean, that Laura seemed like a good person, that she clearly had substance. But substance was not enough on its own. He understood that. She shouldn't suffer for longer than necessary. It would be kinder to end it soon, before it became complicated for her, before she became attached. Hajun was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. It not the small, involuntary nod of a man caught off guard. A real one. Deliberate. The nod of a man who had, somewhere before this dinner, already reached a conclusion he had not found the courage to name. Laura looked at the table. Then she looked at Ha-joon's profile. He was looking down at his bowl. He had the particular stillness of someone who has decided something and is waiting for someone else to create the moment in which it becomes real. She thought about Mrs. Yoon. And she thought about a kitchen in Brixton with steam on the windows, about a small ceramic cup of sikye, sweet and cold, handed across a counter by a woman who had never asked Laura to be anything other than hungry and present. She thought about a language that had lived in her body for 20 years, boxed away in a room she had locked and then, at some point, simply forgotten she had the key to. She had the key. She picked up her chopsticks. As she used them to lift a piece of braised lotus root from the side dish in front of her, and she ate it slowly, and she thought about what she wanted to say. Not what would cause the most damage. That was available to her, and she knew it, and she set it aside. What she wanted was accuracy. She wanted to say the true thing in the language in which it had been decided, so that there could be no question about what had been heard and what had been understood and what she thought about all of it. She set the chopsticks down. She looked at Hajun's mother first, then his father, then the grandmother, whom she looked at for a breath longer than the others. Then she spoke, in Korean, calm and unhurried, with the particular accent of someone who learned the language in a small kitchen in Brixton from a woman who was from Busan, which gave her vowels a slight southern quality that would have been impossible to manufacture, and that now, in this dining room in Seongbuk-dong, I'd made his mother's face go absolutely still. She said, "I've been attached for a while. I think you should know that." The fork his father was holding stopped moving. Hajun turned toward her, but she did not look at him. She said, still in Korean, "Thank you for being honest with each other tonight. It was more honesty than I have been receiving in private, and I found it useful." She paused. "I'm not here to embarrass anyone. I don't have any interest in that. I came here because I thought I was part of something real, and I wanted to respect it by showing up." She looked at the grandmother then, directly, and she said more gently, "The food is extraordinary, the jjigae especially, the doenjang paste. It's the good kind. Someone here knows what they're doing." The grandmother's mouth shifted. Not quite a smile, something that lived just beside a smile, more honest than one. She looked at Hajun last. He had gone the color of something drained, and he was looking at her with an expression she had no name for. Not guilt exactly, or not only guilt, but the look of a man who has just understood the full dimension of a thing he has lost, and cannot argue about, because the loss is entirely his own construction. She said to him in English, because she wanted this part to be unmistakable, "Next time, tell the truth in any language." She stood up. She thanked his parents for dinner in Korean, formally and without irony. She thanked them for their hospitality. She bowed. It was the correct depth, and she held it the correct length of time, because Mrs. Yoon had taught her this in a kitchen in South London. And she had not forgotten it. She had just stopped claiming it. She walked out of the dining room and through the entrance hall, and she put on her shoes at the door. She was precise about this. She did not rush. Outside, the air in Seongbuk-dong at night was cold and clean with the smell of pine from the hills above. The street was very quiet. Below, somewhere, Seoul was moving at its constant velocity, enormous and unbothered. She had been standing on the pavement for perhaps 30 seconds when Hajun came through the door behind her. She heard him stop a few feet away. She did not turn around. "Laura?" His voice had lost all its conference room composure. He sounded, and for the first time since she had known him, genuinely young. "I need you to let me—" "Don't," she said. He stopped. I understand enough, she said. That's not a figure of speech. She started walking down the hill. He did not follow after the first few steps. She heard him stop. She did not look back. The hill curved and the house disappeared behind her, and she was alone on a stone-paved lane in a city that was hers now, in a way it had not been 2 hours ago. Because she had spoken in it and been heard in it, and she had done so in her own voice. 3 weeks later, Laura submitted an application to an architectural journal based in Seoul. It was a longer shot than she would normally take, and she knew it, and she sent it anyway. She also wrote a long letter, not an email, an actual letter on paper, to a woman in Brixton named Mrs. Yoon, who was 91 now and still lived on the ground floor and who, Laura had been told by her mother, and still made sikye on certain afternoons, for reasons she had never explained to anyone. In the letter, Laura told her about the dinner. She told her about the Korean she had kept all these years, without knowing she was keeping it. She told her about the jjigae that smelled like her hallway used to smell on cold Tuesdays. She told her about the grandmother who had set her chopsticks down and folded her hands as if to say, I see you. I know what this is costing you. I think you are doing it correctly. She did not hear back for 3 weeks. And then a small envelope arrived with handwriting on it that looked like it had been produced with enormous deliberateness, as if every word was a decision. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 2 sentences in Korean. The translation was approximately this: You always understood more than you let on. That was always your greatest strength and your only problem. Laura read it twice. Then she folded it and put it in the inside pocket of her coat, which was where she kept the things she planned to carry with her. The Seoul position came through 6 weeks later. She accepted it on a Thursday morning, sitting at her desk in London with the city going about its ordinary life outside the window. She accepted it with the particular steadiness of someone who has recently learned the difference between fitting into a space and belonging in one. She had learned Korean by accident. As in a kitchen that smelled like doenjang and old radio songs, from a woman who had never once asked her whether she had the right to be there. That night in Seongbuk-dong, she had learned something she would carry considerably further. That the language you bury is still yours. That the room where you are underestimated is still a room you can fill with your full voice. That love without the courage to be honest in any language is not a foundation. It is a waiting room. And that sometimes the dinner that was meant to shrink you is the one that finally shows you the size of what you actually are. If this story stayed with you, if you recognize something in Laura that you've been carrying quietly, leave it in the comments. Subscribe if you want to be here for the next one. There are more stories like this one. There always are.